From Quito, Ecuador, my name is Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South, the evening news brief on Telesur English. And we begin this new edition right now. The president of the Electoral Tribunal in Honduras, David Matamoros, says that yesterday's protests delayed the ballot count, although he expects every vote to be processed this afternoon and to have definite results in the presidential race. During a press conference, Matamoros said he's been worried about not having the electoral results on time. President Juan Orlando Hernandez is now leading the count as he gets closer to a new period in office. Meanwhile, oppositional protesters continue in the streets of Tegucigalpa, Honduras, to rally against presidential candidate Juan Orlando Hernandez, who has declared victory over his contender Salvador Nasralla. Security forces deployed tear gas against Nasralla demonstrators, who set tires to fire and marched against the alleged manipulation of the presidential election results. Several people were reportedly wounded.
What's currently happening in Honduras is very important. It's another sign of American imperialism meddling in the internal issues of countries that fight for a better future. We want a country that belongs to everyone. The American empire continues to interfere in Latin America. It continues to stick its dirty hands in countries which are trying to establish democratic governments that will look after the majority, not just the wealthy minority. We stand in solidarity with the Honduran people. They cannot give up because their fight is just, and they will achieve their goal.
Overnight, the results released by the Supreme Electoral Court suddenly showed a lead for President Hernandez. With 92% of the ballot boxes counted, the latest numbers show that President Hernandez has 42.88%, while Salvador Nasralla of the center-left opposition alliance has 41.46%. On Tuesday, Nasralla had a lead of 4%. Our correspondent Heather Geese joins us now live from Tegucigalpa. Hello, Heather. We can see that the Electoral Court official website shows the difference between the candidates as slightly growing, and at the same time we see more and more images of outrage growing in the streets of Tegucigalpa. Can you explain to us what's happening?
Yes, so right now all week tension has been rising, and that seems to kind of be getting closer and closer to a boiling point. Today, protesters are again in the streets, but unlike we saw earlier this week when those were kind of joyous celebrations of victory, celebrating the fact that Salvador Nasralla seemed projected to win the presidency, these are now protests of outrage. People are very fed up with what's happening with the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, because 4 days without results has simply been too much. This is something that's never happened in Honduras. In the 2013 election, when President Juan Orlando Hernandez was elected for the first time, final results of the winner were announced the same night of the elections. And now we're 4 days after, when the Supreme Electoral Tribunal had said that at the latest, final results would be ready Thursday. So we're hearing now that we could have those final results still this afternoon, but there's been long delays, there's been long silences, and there's been a very peculiar change in the direction of the results. So after the initial report of preliminary results, when Salvador Nasralla was holding about a 5% lead over President Juan Orlando Hernandez, there was a prolonged silence from the Supreme Electoral Tribunal. When the results started to trickle out again, we saw that margin of victory decreasing, and then eventually the incumbent president surpassing Salvador Nasralla. So that went against what previously we had been told was an irreversible trend towards victory for Salvador Nasralla, which people who are in the streets protesting, urging the Supreme Electoral Tribunal to be transparent and honest in this process of reporting the results. They say that there's no explanation for that. One of the explanations we're hearing is that the Supreme Electoral Tribunal has been processing the votes in a discriminatory way, favoring or processing votes from areas that are National Party strongholds and not processing votes from areas where the opposition alliance has strong support, primarily in the northern part of the country. However, yesterday the opposition alliance also denounced other irregularities that are taking place, including the fact that yesterday, right after Nasrallah and Hernandez signed an agreement at the request of the Organization of American States to respect the Supreme Electoral Tribunal's final results, the system and servers of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal went down for a few hours. And so Nasrallah was concerned about what kinds of manipulations were happening during that time when the servers were down. And he pointed to the fact that there are allegedly tally sheets with signatures being entered, the fact that over 5,000 tally sheets were scanned not at the polling stations as they usually are, but rather were scanned once the tally sheets had arrived in Tegucigalpa, and also the fact that a large number of tally sheets representing some 200,000 votes in polling stations that favored the opposition alliance have been set aside for special monitoring or are in need of going under additional scrutiny. So these are all irregularities that the opposition alliance has said are leading it to not trust the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, and that's why Nasrallah retracted his signature from that OAS agreement with Hernandez, saying that they will both respect the final results from the Supreme Electoral Tribunal because there's fear that manipulations have been going on. There's widespread suspicions of fraud, and the opposition alliance is not willing to accept a result that they say has been tampered with.
Thank you very much, Heather, for your update on Honduras. That was Heather Gies from Honduras. To Venezuela now, where two former heads of the state-owned company, PDVSA, have been arrested in a major crackdown on corruption in the country's most important industry. The Attorney General announced the arrest early on Thursday morning of Eulogio Del Pino and Nelson Martinez. Del Pino was also Minister of Energy until the beginning this week. In total, Tarek William Saab said 65 PDVSA managers have now been detained and are being investigated.
Therefore, early in the morning, Nelson Martinez was placed under arrest due to his presumed ties to the debt refinancing contract by Citgo Petroleum Corporation. The signing of this contract happened without the approval of the government. Likewise, at around the same time, Eulogio Del Pino, former PDVSA president and oil minister, was placed under arrest by officers of the military intelligence. The preliminary assumptions in this criminal case assign the presumed responsibility of Eulogio Del Pino in the corruption schemes at Petro Zamora regarding sabotage in the oil fields that affected Venezuelan joint venture with a regrettable loss of 15 million barrels a day and property damage estimated to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Earlier today, we spoke to our correspondent Frederick Gillingham in Caracas to learn more details about the arrests and the PDVSA cleanup that is currently underway.
It has emerged that arrests estimated 15,700 barrels of oil a day have been lost as a result of corruption within PDVSA from the period of 2014 to 2017. This is due to bad maintenance of the facilities and mismanagement. Venezuela's oil production accounts to around 95% of its export earnings, so the arrests of these two major figures could explain the reasons why oil production has slumped so badly in recent years.
The arrest also coincide with a summit of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, in Vienna, where Russia and the OPEC members have announced they will extend the agreement for oil production cuts until the end of 2018. Our correspondent in Vienna, Sergio Rodrigo, sent this report.
Here in Vienna, at the headquarters of OPEC, a 9-month extension of the accord was reached between member and non-member countries that was set to expire in March of 2018 The member countries held an assembly this morning, after which they had a meeting with non-member countries, particularly Russia, in order to reach an agreement to maintain the export reduction quota at 1.8 million barrels a day as a way to stabilize the oil market, but especially as a means to allow excess oil from fracking in the United States to leave the market. This excess oil weakened oil prices, and over the past few months, OPEC member countries have been trying to fix the damage. They insist that the increase in oil prices over the past few months has been a result of these kind of measures, which is why today's extension was reached. Member and non-member countries have continued to meet throughout the day in order to agree on other measures that would help stabilize the price of oil.
That was our correspondent from Vienna, Sergio Rodriguez. And we'll be coming back with more news in a minute. Stay with us. The former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, has accused the current government of preparing a coup after President Lenín Moreno ordered the electoral authority to hold a plebiscite. Many members of the ruling party see this as an attempt to roll back the achievements of Ecuador's citizens' revolution. Telesur's Pablo Vivanco has been at a news conference given by Correa and sent this report.
Since Tuesday, supporters of former Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa have been gathered outside of the País movement's offices here in Quito, Ecuador, to show support for Correa and his leftist party. País became bitterly divided after Lenín Moreno, who won the April elections as candidate for País, took office. Correa and his allies have accused Moreno of taking the party in a rightward shift. Now, speaking to international media today, Correa accused Moreno of staging a coup after the Ecuadorian president ordered the electoral authorities to move forward with a controversial referendum, which, despite the fact that there is a ruling pending from the Constitutional Court. Here's what Correa had to say.
I hope Ecuador and the entire world understand we are facing a coup. They want to call for an unconstitutional referendum by intentionally ignoring the Constitutional Court's report, which is mandatory. Why? Because they know that the questions in that referendum are unconstitutional and wouldn't have been approved by the Constitutional Court. This is very serious. A violation of the Constitution is happening. A coup is happening. I hope that the international press tells the whole world about this serious situation. They may have brute power, but they are not right. They can unconstitutionally call for a referendum. They control the police and army, who take care of the logistics for election processes. But everything that is being done is absolutely unconstitutional. They are violating the Constitution.
Correa also detailed what he's calling political deals between Moreno and the court and insisted that at least 2 of the questions are unconstitutional. After Moreno issued his decree, the head of the National Electoral Council, Juan Pablo Pozo, resigned. This is something that a lot of people are saying is not a coincidence. This weekend, both factions of País will be holding meetings as the political differences in the movement have spilled over into organizational ones. And Correa and his allies are determined to finalize Moreno's exit as the head of the movement. Despite Correa returning to the country in order to participate into this Congress, he insisted that he is not going to be returning to the country and will dedicate his coming years to his family in Belgium. Pablo Ivanco, Telesur, Quito.
The Bolivian President Evo Morales has confirmed he will seek a 4th term in 2019. He said he made this decision in response to interference from the United States, which had asked him not to stand for office. Social movements have been celebrating the decision to allow him to run again. More details in the next report.
The Constitutional Court's decision to allow candidates of elected authorities to run for re-elections was accepted unanimously by its members.
The court is allowing all these people to run.
Immediately popular null in Sunday's elections.
This Sunday there will be a strong answer against those who are promoting a coup.
Social movements that have supported President Evo Morales' call to be allowed to run for president again have led massive mobilizations throughout the country, and they have called for the people to accept what the majority chooses in 2019.
This is pro-democracy, for everyone to be able to run, for us to see in 2019 who's the one who truly has popular support.
So we are very happy. We are sure that in 2019, the Bolivian people will elect who will be our president.
President Evo Morales thanks social movements and those who insisted for him to run for a new term.
I only want to say to those people who not only care but also act, I salute them, I respect them, and I admire them. We are part of the people. We will always be with you, accompanying you to keep working the way we are doing now.
The Constitutional Court's decision is based on Article 23 of the Inter-American Human Rights Convention that recognizes the right of people to elect and be elected without any type of restrictions. The resolution allows the re-election of president, vice president, mayors, and governors.
As Chile prepares for the second round of its presidential election, people have taken to the streets to protest against the pension system that manages all retirement funds. Our correspondent Paola Dragnic has more in this report.
The social changes have to be made on the streets. That's what the leaders of the No More AFP movement have said after meeting with the presidential candidate Alejandro Guillier this morning. They have said that no matter who ends up being the president, either Sebastián Pinera or Alejandro Guillier, the protest will continue. They asked the candidate Guillier that if he wins the presidency, he has to call for a referendum about the bill that is currently in the lower house. It will increase the pensions without changing the pension model that is now in private pension funds.
That was Paola Dragnic from Chile. 29 people have been sentenced to life imprisonment in Argentina for human rights violations committed at a clandestine detention and torture center during Videla's dictatorship era. The trial involved some 800 cases of kidnapping, torture, and murder during the 1976 and 1983 dictatorship. Former Argentine Navy Captain Alfredo Astis, known as the Angel of Death, and Jorge Acosta, the Tiger, have been sentenced to life imprisonment. In addition to the life sentences, 19 people received jail terms of 8 to 25 years.
We agree that these trials should move forward, despite how Macri's government continues obstructing the path of justice. But besides that, hearing the words life imprisonment for two of the main pilots of the dead flights, it really brings up mixed emotions. I don't know if the right word is happiness, but we're celebrating that this is happening.
The island of Barbados has been celebrating the 51st anniversary of its independence. The country celebrated with an official Independence Day ceremony and parade where hundreds of members of service groups took part. The Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, police force, and military units marched in various formations in front of local and tourists alike, despite of the rain. Canada has pledged $78 million for reconstruction and climate resilience in the Caribbean over the next 5 years. The announcement was made by Celina Cesar Chavanes, the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of International Development, at the recent Caribbean Community and UN High-Level Pledging Conference in New York. The 2017 Atlantic hurricane season and the Category 5 storms caused extensive damage to several Caribbean islands. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Today, the White House reaffirmed that Rex Tillerson remains the U.S. Secretary of State, despite reports and rumors of his upcoming departure. Earlier, we contacted our correspondent Jorge Gestoso in Washington to give us an in-depth look at the situation.
what the New York Times is reporting this morning is that the plan to replace Rex Tillerson by Mike Pompeo has been designed by the Chief of Staff of the White House, John Kelly, and the rumors are that should be triggered by the end of the year or early next year. On the other hand, the Senator Bob Corker says that he believes that it's not going to be ousted of Tillerson because it has been speculations that he could be being replaced right away. The presumption is that he's going to stay until the end of the year at the least.
Pastoral communities from the north of Kenya are denouncing that the Maasai community is affected by a police operation. We have this special report.
Samburu Parliament unanimously decided to break its silence and denounce the killing of cows in Laikipia.
It was tribal and also political.
They believe these police raids are meant to evict Maasai ministers from Laikipia and Samburu for political and tribal reasons.
One tribe in Laikipia is trying to get out Samburu out of Laikipia in order for them to take up the Samburu land. So they are trying to use the force, armed personnel of the government, to get Samburus out of Laikipia, simply because they wanted to replace or take over the land being owned by Samburus.
The raids happened in communal lands, and the ministers were not criminals, but future unhappy voters, according to parliamentarians.
They are trying to criminalize them, that these are criminals, while they are not.
They are making these people to be useless.
Samburu families came back to the pastoral communities north of Laikipia, although most of the land was already sold. The Samburu got to elect a congressman during the last elections, but the Samburu lands are being affected by climate change, especially during the dry season and by the activities of private ranches.
The prominent government people are also using means to make sure that Samburus get out of the land, so that when the leases expire, the leases for the ranches expire in the near future, then they will take up the land so easily.
What is happening is that the Maasai community, the land historically belonged to the Maasai people, but now there's a lot of pressure from this elite, who are continuing in widening the gap between the rich and the poor to push the Maasais out.
The pastoral communities are preparing a plan to improve their resilience. Because of this, they are focusing the dialogue on the state action against the pastoral communities and the indigenous rights. From Samburu land, Oscar Epelde for Telesur.
Now let's take a look at some of the other stories that are making headlines around the world.
The European Union, United Nations and African Union have agreed to an emergency plan to dismantle people smuggling networks and repatriate stranded migrants in an effort to ease a human rights disaster in Libya. This is after a CNN report earlier this month showed African migrants being auctioned off as slaves by Libyan traffickers.
We took firm decisions on the immediate evacuation of refugees, setting up a committee led by the African Union's Commission on Human Rights, assisted, helped by the European Union, pursuing smugglers of human beings, and we consider this smuggling a crime against humanity. And also, the various countries must put in place special forces to fight against smugglers of human beings.
Palestinian rival factions have delayed the handover of power in the Gaza Strip by at least 10 days. The delay has caused some to fear that this recent landmark deal to end their decade-long feud may be set to fail.
The delay does not benefit the people. First of all, every moment we are waiting for reconciliation. We want to achieve reconciliation as quickly as possible. The people have less than nothing.
The reconciliation didn't fail and will not fail. Hamas will continue until the end to make the reconciliation succeed. This is a strategic decision. We will not step back. It is required from the government to apply the agreements it made until the process is complete.
British Prime Minister Theresa May has criticized U.S. President Donald Trump over his recent tweets. On Wednesday, Trump retweeted tweets from the deputy leader of a British far-right group. Trump hit back at May, tweeting that she should focus on terrorism in Britain and not on him. Pope Francis is in Bangladesh after a diplomatically sensitive trip to mainly Buddhist Myanmar. The Pope met with Bangladeshi President Abdul Hamid. On Friday, the Pope is expected to meet a group of Rohingya refugees.
More than 1,000 Bosnian Croats held a vigil in Mostar for Slobodan Praljak, a wartime commander who took poison in a UN war crimes courtroom on Wednesday. Praljak, who was 72, was the commander of Bosnian Croat forces during the 1992 to 1995 Bosnian War. He was handed a 20-year sentence in 2013 as part of a group of 6 Bosnian Croat military and political officials that were found guilty of committing war crimes against Bosnian Muslims.
I, along with all members of the government who were here, sincerely regret this act. It shows, I think, such a degree of conviction of Slobodan Praljak that in everything he did it with the goal of doing good for the Croat people. I can't think of any act similar to this. I don't think something like it ever happened.
So who was Slobodan Praljak, the Bosnian war crime convict who committed suicide in the UN court room in Hague? Slobodan Praljak was a key figure during the long siege and shelling of the ethnically mixed city of Mostar in South Bosnia between 1992 and 1995. He was the main liaison between political and military leaders in Croatia and the Croatian force fighting in Bosnia. While the court declared him a war criminal and sentenced him to 20 years in prison, thousands of Bosnian Croats see him as a hero and held a vigil in Mostar in his honor. The Croatian Prime Minister also came to his support.
It is an event without a precedent, especially in any international tribunal. In a way, he sent a message on what he thinks and how he felt the verdict, which is also, in our opinion, unjust. For the 6 Croats from Bosnia and for Croatian people. But also in that part, which alludes to certain elements of connection between the then state leadership of the Republic of Croatia and war developments in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
And we have come to the end of this evening news brief. This and many other news, you can find them at our website, telesurtv.net/English. And you can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.